Good evening, and welcome to We Make the Way, an online series brought to you by the ACLU of Florida. My name is Micah Kubik, the ACLU of Florida's Executive Director, and we thank you for joining us tonight. We have a great panel lined up this evening to discuss a very troubling topic, the school-to-prison pipeline and how to end it. Now, if you haven't seen earlier installments of We Make the Way, you're in for a real treat tonight because of this wonderful panel and the information that they're going to share with you. Every episode of We Make the Way is about taking a closer look at civil liberties and civil rights in Florida. Our shared values are under attack on a daily basis, sometimes in ways that are high profile, sometimes in ways that are nearly invisible. We want to go deep on those issues that are already garnering attention. We want to make the invisible issues visible, and we want to highlight the real actions that we can take together to stand up for our values. We do that by talking directly with some of the most courageous, committed, and inspiring members of the movement for a more just Florida. People who are putting in real work to make the way for progress. Now tonight, we're discussing the school-to-prison pipeline. It's a phrase you've probably heard often, and it refers to the fact that in disturbing ways, our education, youth services, and criminal legal systems have become deeply intertwined. We're hurting children, hurting families, and hurting communities by over-policing, overcharging, over-sentencing, and over-punishing young people, kids, students. Rather than recognizing that children need schools, education, counselors, services, our state and our country's response right now is too often to criminalize and harshly punish young people for the most trivial of incidents. Now, in the last 2 years alone, Florida has made national headlines for arresting little kids at school. The state has seen an increase in arrests at school since 2018, and there are now more police officers working in Florida schools than school nurses. In addition, Florida prosecutes more children in the adult criminal justice system for felonies than any other state in the United States. Since 2009, more than 14,000 children, some as young as 10, have been prosecuted as adults in our state. And to make it all even worse, this is a system that especially, though certainly not exclusively, harms youth of color. The pipeline that has been created is a set of conditions that lead to the structural racism that we see in our criminal legal system and gives rise to shameful over-incarceration. Now, those of us here tonight, we believe that children should be educated and nurtured and supported, not incarcerated. So we want to discuss tonight how we can end policies in public schools and the juvenile justice system that contributes to this school-to-prison pipeline. And to do that, we're fortunate to have a fantastic panel made up of folks who spend their days thinking about and working on youth rights and youth justice reform. Our great panel is made up of Bacardi Jackson, Alfredo Zamora, and Kim Lawrence. Thank you all for being here this evening. I'm going to ask you to each go around and tell us just a little bit about yourselves and the work you do. And I'm going to ask Bacardi to start with you. You're the Senior Supervising Attorney for Children's Rights at a great partner organization, the Southern Poverty Law Center. Tell folks a little bit about yourself and the work that you focus on there.
Thank you so much, Micah. Yes, I'm Bacardi Jackson, as you said, and Senior Supervising Attorney for Children's Rights, the Managing Attorney for the Miami office. We focus on three main buckets. We work to stop the school-to-prison pipeline, ensuring that students have access to mental health and other health care, and fighting for equitable education that is mostly focusing on trying to keep public funds in public schools. So we have been doing work across Florida on a number of these issues, trying to fight for minimum age of arrest, looking at issues of over-policing and the so-called school safety measures have been harming our children, as well as challenging and looking at the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Commission recommendations that create a surveillance state and a law and order kind of school climate that is mostly based on fear rather than on evidence about what actually works. And I will mention too, I'm the mother of 3 school-age children in Broward County.
Thank you so much, Bacardi. Next, we'll go to Alfredo Zamora, who is the Deputy Chief Assistant State Attorney. That means VIP, very important prosecutor, for the 9th Judicial Circuit, which covers Orange and Osceola counties. Alfredo, tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do all day.
Thank you for that introduction. I am a prosecutor. I'm the Deputy Chief at the 9th Judicial Circuit, and I work for State Attorney Monique Worrell. Monique Worrell ran on a platform of changing the culture of prosecution, bringing criminal justice reform to our community through the role of a prosecutor. And one of her passions and her specific agendas is to crush the school to prison pipeline by treating children like children. I've been in this role for probably about 90 days because we are a new administration. Prior to this, I worked as a defense attorney for about 6 years. And prior to that, I worked as a prosecutor in Miami for 4 years. So I have spent my entire career involved in the criminal justice system. I have seen the criminal justice system throughout our entire state of Florida. Florida is a very long state with different courts and different handling things in different ways across the state. And as the deputy chief here, I am working with our staff to try and change that culture, to try and ensure that we only direct file in the most egregious and the most extreme of circumstances, and to try and encourage that even when we do direct file, that we still remember that we are dealing with a child, and we try and fashion some kind of resolution, if a resolution is possible, with that in mind, understanding that children need to be treated as children. And we believe that one of the ways to do that is by partnering with our community.
Great, thank you so much. And finally, we have Kim Lawrence, who's a strong, committed, dynamic advocate for criminal justice reform, especially for juveniles here in Florida. So Kim, share a little bit about yourself.
Hi, so I'm a mom of a 15-year-old girl at the time. She was direct filed. She's now 21, and she was sentenced to 10 years in the adult prison. She'll get out when she's 2024. So we have 3 more years to go. I'm also I'll be working my dissertation on juveniles' risk perception of felony collateral consequences in my PhD program. So juvenile focus is very important to me, with them not ending up in prison.
Great, thank you so much. Again, thanks to all of you for being with us tonight. Thanks to those of you who are watching tonight as well. So if you have questions for our panelists as the conversation goes on, just drop those in the comments section, and we will end our discussion tonight by addressing at least a few of those. So first, let's dive right into the discussion, though. And I want to ask each of you to just give us some general thoughts about the state of justice for young people in Florida. We hear this phrase, school to prison pipeline, a lot. And I've heard that there are some people who vehemently reject the whole concept, say that no such thing exists. But tell us, do you think that such a pipeline exists? And how does Florida stack up against other states? And Bacardi, I think I'd ask you to go first, if you don't mind.
Certainly, no problem. Absolutely. I think we can all probably here tonight agree that there is a thing that is often referred to as a school to prison pipeline. And I know there are people who do reject not only the notion of it, but also the naming, because it seems to insinuate that all schools may lead children to prison or something to that effect. So it may be a bit of a misnomer, but it is something that has come out of the fact that, unfortunately, for decades, we have been able to draw a direct link from certain schools directly to prisons. When I started doing this work back in the early 90s, it was the case, and I was in New York at the time, it was the case that there were 17 school districts in the city of New York that produced 75% of the state's population. So it's undoubtedly an actual problem of that we can identify and understand, that there are systemic and policy failures that have created this, as I mentioned, law and order school climate and a surveillance state that makes it much more likely that students and children will have interactions with law enforcement while they are in school where they should be learning. And as you mentioned, for the first time, we have more police. We have made this value judgment to put more police in our schools, not only more than school nurses, but we have almost twice as many police than we have social workers or than we have school psychologists. And so not only is it this decision to over police our children and to surveil them and to take away their privacy rights and to think of them as things to be controlled rather than cared for and educated, but it is also at the same time a policy decision and a value judgment that we should be taking away and not providing the sufficient resources that we know would serve them well. We don't provide the mental health supports. We have in Florida a ratio of over 400 to 1 of school counselors to children, for children to school counselors, when the recommended ratio should be 250 to 1. So we are not meeting the very basic needs of our children. We are not following models like the community schools models where we provide wraparound services in schools that provide mental health services, that provide health services, that provide job assistance for families. We know there are systems and models that work, and yet we continually choose to police instead of care for and educate. So that is what, you know, I believe is often referred to, maybe not absolutely appropriately, but it is certainly a call to action for us to question those values and question those systemic failures that we could do something about if we so choose.
Thank you, Ricardi. Alfredo, what do you think? Is the school to prison pipeline real?
Absolutely. And I think that you can draw a line from, I believe minimum mandatories found its origin in schools, in guns being brought to schools, and how they declared a zero tolerance policy to that. And from there, you started to see legislation like the '94 crime bill and a variety of other things that have just resulted into the police state that Ms. Jackson kind of talks about. I think it has become the response. If you're a problem child and we don't know what to do with you, then we'll arrest you, and we will arrest ourselves out of these problems, remove you from these schools. That way the schools can continue to run without you. We have learned through the data, as we look at mass incarceration of adults, you cannot jail yourself out of these issues. So to think that we can do that with children is illogical, in my opinion. I currently work as a prosecutor, as we announced as I introduced myself, and I feel very lucky and privileged that I get to work for a state attorney whom is dedicated to eradicating the school to prison pipeline by teaching our young prosecutors that we are to treat children like children, and we are to, we do not control if a law enforcement makes an arrest, but we get to control what happens after that. So in working in partnership with law enforcement, we are trying to encourage civil citations, diversion programs, and more importantly, trying to work with our community, because as it relates to children's problems most certainly stem from what's happening in their home life, what's happening in their community. And if we don't try and focus on that as well, we are not going to be helping these children. To put them in jail just to re-release them back to these homes and these communities is not a solution. And so in my role as a prosecutor, one, I get the privilege of working, like I said, for a state attorney who wants to change the culture. And two, I get to work directly with law enforcement and community partners to try and come up with creative solutions to stop the school to prison pipeline and instead create a pipeline where we are dedicated to treating children like children.
Thank you so much for that. Kim, what do you think? What's your thought on this one? School to prison pipeline real?
Oh, definitely. I always want to wonder why there's no like resource in the school as far as like social workers right there, psychologists, like you said, they need more nurses, but they should have more availability or like, what if a child is getting abused at home? I mean, other than a teacher recognizing that and making a phone call, but if there's somebody like right in the school, like maybe an outreach center or something along those lines, where the kid can walk in, you know, on their own and talk to somebody, and it's available right there. Why not, you know, have social workers there right in the school? What if they're hungry? What if they're homeless? I mean, they don't know to go make an appointment somewhere, you know what I mean? So why not have it right there, accessible to the kids? It's always a trauma. There's usually always a trauma. There's something behind when kids are acting out. There's some kind of trauma in their life that's happened usually.
That's right. Okay, let's drill down just a little bit on some of the ways that this works. Now, as we noted earlier, Florida has recently made national headlines, and not in the good way, not in the sunshine and happiness way, for police arrests of very young children. The pictures and the video have been horrifying, and I've heard from people around the country saying, what on earth are you doing, putting such young children in handcuffs? So, Kim, I want to ask you, is there a minimum age of arrest in Florida? And if not, what impact does that have on kids?
There's really not a minimal age. Minimum age. The impact is they get arrested. I mean, for regular kid stuff, like even having a school fight gets them arrested. Meanwhile, kids, that's something that kids do when they're going through their childhood. They fight with their brothers and sisters, they fight with their cousins, and just because they fight at school or act out doesn't mean that they should be arrested. And it's happening at, you know, middle school age, where they're getting arrested for having a fight. And that's got to stop.
Absolutely. So as a reminder, if you're watching at home and have a question for the panel, just drop it in the chat and we'll get to a few of those at the end. But Bacardi, I want to follow up on what Kim was saying. I want to follow up with you on this thought. Why aren't arrests of very young kids outlawed in Florida? I mean, why do we consider this acceptable? And what impact does this have on youth of color who we know are disproportionately harmed?
Yeah, thank you for that question. You know, it is again a matter of will. We are one of just a few states. There are certainly different policies across this nation, but we are one of the few that has absolutely no minimum age whatsoever in Florida. If you wanted to, you could arrest a 6-month-old. That would be perfectly legal here. We do, and we have seen that we are arresting 5- and 6-year-olds. In fact, in the 2018-19 school year, we arrested elementary school children 345 times, which included a 5-year-old and 5 arrests of 6-year-olds. Many people may remember the video footage of Kaya Roll, and that is the bill that's currently pending is the Kaya Roll Act. Kaya Roll, who was only 6 years old and who was brutally arrested and taken away and had long-term consequences as a result. I had an opportunity to actually meet Kaya Roll's grandmother and learn that, you know, when she had the opportunity to go back to school, she literally gripped the seat and would not come out because she did not want to go back to jail. This is the kind of trauma we are creating for children. And she was not acting out or doing anything more than a normal 6-year-old tantrum because she had a condition that caused her not to sleep well at night. So instead of addressing the medical needs that she had, we decided that the better position to take was to put this child into handcuffs in a police car and take her to be arrested. Again, this is a values choice. It is not something that is necessary. It is not something that is effective. And so we are making that choice far too often in Florida, and we are not having the courage to make our legislators listen to us. The bill that was pending last year in the last session was asking for a minimum age of 12 or younger. That bill got amended down to 7 or younger. We are seeing a similar track this year. Last session, we could not even pass 7 or younger. And that to me is a deep, deep tragedy, and one on which we should be calling our legislators about and saying this is unacceptable. We cannot be in a state that is arresting 5 and 6-year-olds. There are interventions that we can do that make much more sense. When you even think about what is a 5-year-old reading, and you think about the mental capacity and what they understand and their actual culpability, and we think arrest is appropriate, there is something seriously broken. Again, we can call on our legislators to do better, and we should.
Yeah, it's absolutely disgraceful. So Alfredo, I want to send the next question to you to start. So a couple of folks have already mentioned this evening that Florida has something called direct file. It's a completely ambiguous sounding term. You know, I think it sounds like you're describing a giant filing cabinet or something. And the words themselves tell us absolutely nothing about what it means. There's no way you could figure out what it means just from the phrase itself. And maybe that's on purpose, because I think the practice, the policy behind that phrase is pretty horrifying. It refers to something that local prosecutors in Florida have the power to do. So Alfredo, tell us a little bit about what is this direct file thing, and why is it harmful enough that prosecutors like the one you work for are working to end it?
I apologize. On mute. Direct file speaks to the process in which a prosecutor's office is charging a child as an adult. And so they no longer are involved in the juvenile criminal system. They are now involved in the adult criminal system. They would get a bond. They would be housed in a county jail, in the juvenile portion of a county jail, but nevertheless the county jail. And they would be subjected to potentially adult penalties. There's a variety of different reasons why an office can direct file an individual. And there are some times when it is mandatory that an office direct file an individual. Our office is dedicated to not direct filing minors unless it is mandatory under the law. And I can speak to that if you'd like me to, unless there is a loss of life or unless there are some serious violent sexual assaults. Now, when I say I do understand that there may be situations that we have to look at and determine whether a direct file is appropriate, but that is our threshold. We are aiming not to direct file any children unless there is a loss of life or a violent sexual assault. And even then, when we have direct filed that child over to adult court, we are asking our juvenile team to work in conjunction with our general felony team to ensure that we are continuing to remember that we are dealing with a child, and to determine if juvenile sanctions are still appropriate, despite the fact that they've been placed into the adult system, or if other sanctions should be considered.
Great, thank you for that. Kim, I want to turn to you. You already shared with us that you have some experience with this practice. Tell us a little bit about why it's so troubling and so distressing.
Well, like he said, they charge them as an adult. She went in as a juvenile, and within 21 days, the prosecutor decided to rearrest her in the middle of the night, and they even changed the outfit and everything, the uniform, and recharged her. And then she went to adult court the next morning and started the whole adult process. So from there, yeah, she was housed with juveniles, but separate from juveniles. So really she was alone, because they can't be around adults and they can't be around the kids. So pretty much she stayed housed alone. There was maybe sometimes 1 or 2 others. From there, she went to prison. By then, she's now 16. She goes to prison, which again Now she can't be around the people in prison because she's underage. So she gets stuck in an abandoned wing of the prison in solitary by herself. And there was another girl that came along too, and she left. She only had, I guess, a year or something like that. And then another girl, but for a whole year she was alone in the dorm by herself because of the age problem. They can't even attend school. Like they can't go with the rest of the group to go to like class. They're by themselves. You have to study by yourself. You can't do any of the programs because you're not old enough. And they end up, especially females, because females there's a lot less that are direct filed. So you'll run across there's very few that are underage. So you really end up by yourself as a female. I just lost my train of thought. So she spent a lot of time alone until she was 18, and then she joined the youth group, and then now she's with the regular adults. But they don't have the resources to tend to minors because they can't participate. So they shouldn't be there. If they can't tend to them, they shouldn't be there.
Thank you for sharing that with us. I know it's a very difficult situation, so thank you for sharing some of what your family has gone through. So I want to stay on the theme of innocuous sounding terms that mask really shameful practices. And there's another really important component of this that's called the Baker Act. The Baker Act. Not about bakers, not about cakes, cookies, pies, but not something that a lot of people have heard of. But it's a law that has some dramatic consequences for students in Florida, especially students of color. So Bacardi, can you tell us a little bit about what the Baker Act is, what it does, how it affects people?
Yes, and thank you for raising this very important issue. It is one we have been keenly focused on because it impacts so many children in Florida. The Baker Act is the Florida Mental Health Act, and that's just the name that it was given when it was created. And so most people in Florida, unfortunately, have probably heard of it. We use it so commonly. It has become, as we pointed out in our recently issued report, a verb. You will often hear of children who are Baker Acted and are being Baker Acted. And that means that they are being taken away for a involuntary psychiatric examination. And that too may sound much more innocuous than it actually is, because the process of what happens to a child is that they are often confronted. And again, we do this to children as young as 5 and 6 years old, but they are confronted by usually a uniformed armed officer. They are put in handcuffs. They are put in the back of police cars. They are taken away to a receiving facility where they could be kept for 72 business hours, which means it could be more than 72 hours. And for children who are in foster care and who may, as a result of being Baker Acted, lose placements, it could sometimes be even weeks or months that they are stuck in a facility. Oftentimes in these facilities, despite the patient rights that are built into the statute that prohibit this, but oftentimes children are not even allowed to speak to their parents, and parents are denied the opportunity to come in and see or speak to their children or to retrieve their children. It has the very similar effects on children as being arrested and going to jail. And in fact, the young children who are Baker Acted often can't distinguish between the two. They feel like they have been taken away to jail. They are often taken into facilities where they may come in contact with all kinds of behaviors that they are not used to, or that may traumatize them even further. Sometimes the children are forcibly medicated. It is absolutely a horrific system, and parents feel completely helpless. They are not often asked for their consent, and even sometimes are not notified. And even when parents show up at a school and say, hey, I know how to intervene for my child, I know how to de-escalate my child, they are told, nope, sorry, out of our hands, this child has to be Baker Acted. The other irony about the Baker Act is we give discretion to 3 groups of people to Baker Act a person, and that includes judges, police officers, and mental health professionals. Ironically, police officers have the lowest threshold to Baker Act someone. It's much lower than even a mental health professional who is trained to determine who should actually be Baker Acted. And to be clear, it should only be used in very, very rare circumstances where someone is an imminent threat to themselves or others. But we use it regularly, 37,000 children a year at the last full year count. And just like, and I didn't get to answer the last part of your question before I failed to answer it, which was about how it disproportionately impacts students of color and students with disabilities. Just as arrest, where you see across the nation, Black students are almost twice as likely to be arrested by their than their white peers, and in some counties like Palm Beach County, maybe 4 times. We see that same kind of trend with the Baker Act. Oftentimes, Black students with disabilities are the ones who people call the police on to Baker Act them. It's used as a form of exclusionary discipline to push children out of schools. It is extremely disruptive to their education. It is extremely disruptive to their mental health. And there is absolutely no evidence that it is an effective intervention, even when a child is having a mental health crisis. There are more effective interventions. There should be long-term interventions. Children's own psychiatrists and psychologists and doctors are not often even consulted with or called. So there is a lot that we need to be looking at with the Baker Act. We need serious reform. We need to collect data. We need to force our schools and school districts to collect that data and to report it publicly. There is some data collected, but it is woefully inadequate. And we need to take the discretion out of the hands of untrained people, civilians for purposes of mental health care, and give that discretion only to parents and mental health providers. So it is a serious epidemic problem. And at one point we were seeing that as arrests were going down, Baker Acts were going up, suggesting people were substituting one for the other. They are currently, had been before the pandemic, we're both on an upward trend. But it again is part of this fear-based law and order culture that we are putting in our schools, where teachers and administrators are afraid not to engage police whenever they see a child, in some cases, acting perfectly normally.
Thank you for telling us about the Baker Act. So one last question from me before we go to audience questions. All 3 of you have talked about many challenges, many problems, many injustices in the system. It should be clear that the problem we're facing here is real, is unjust, that it has enormous racial disparities, young Black men in particular facing real disparities here, and the systems that are maintaining this are simply broken. But critique is easy and solutions are always a little harder. So what's a solution here? What's one thing that we could do right now that would reimagine this system? I want to ask each of you to just tell us one thing, one solution that we should pursue right now. Kim, why don't you lead us off?
Well, I'm always for preventative. Like I said, have the resources right there accessible to the kids so that they don't have to depend on somebody else to get them help. They can go right there and have it at their hands, so they can even anonymously walk in an office and say, hey, I'm having problems with, I don't know, something at home, or I'm going through this. And they don't have to wait for some adult to make them an appointment somewhere, or get a call, to somebody for them. So they can just go in by themselves, and maybe, they just need someone to talk to. And that could be just it.
Great. Thank you, Kim. Bacardi, what's one thing that would help us solve some of these deep problems?
There are many things we can do, but one for sure is that we could look at our values and our judgment about how we are spending our resources. We could reduce the number of police that we are putting in our schools, or at the very least, limit them to protecting the periphery of our schools. There is no reason that police should have any regular and daily interaction with children, and they certainly should never be involved in the discipline of children. We know from the research, from the data, that there is a direct correlation from the increased number of police officers in our schools with an increase in the number of expulsions, an increase in the number of arrests, an increase in the number of Baker Acts, an increase in every negative factor that you can come up with. There is nothing that has been useful about having this increased presence in our schools. And we have even seen some schools, for instance, in Miami-Dade, there was a school that had over a dozen school resource officers and only one mental health professional for about 2,000 students. This is a values decision. We can make a different one.
Absolutely. Alfredo, what do you think? What's one thing that we can do to dismantle this pipeline?
So unfortunately, I don't believe it is just one thing, because I believe that our partnerships need to work together to destroy this pipeline. So while I can give you one thing today, I want to answer your question by saying that I am doing the one thing that I believe I can do, and that is that I have rejoined public service, and I am trying to bring criminal justice reform through my employer, through the role of the prosecutor. We need exactly what Ms. Jackson talked about. We need our mental health. We need to identify that mental health is not criminal activity, and that we need our teachers and our police to partner with us to say that we are not going to be arresting children for acting like children. And I think, to answer your question, one thing that I'd like to see happen is that if we are going to have police in schools, which I believe that after a lot of the different school shootings, people did advocate for police to be there, that we have our police take the function of to be there for safety. I'd like to see them dressed as a teacher would be dressed. I'd like to see them interact with students in the capacity as a teacher would interact, but be there and available to serve as a safety, not to be there and serve in the capacity as a disciplinary.
Wonderful. Thanks to all of you for sharing some ideas about what we can do. So now I want to go to some questions from folks who are watching. We have a couple great ones. And I want to go where you just left off, Alfredo. So the question from someone watching is, what policies are we working on to change or prevent the overuse of police force in schools, especially elementary schools? So what are some things that we can do to address that sort of over-policing issue? Any one of you who wants to take that?
So the use of force, I think, is a little different from over-policing. But use of force is something that is dictated through the police force. So I think we need our sheriffs, we need our chiefs to partner with us and to modify their use of force policy as it relates to children. And that is, again, where a partnership with our community and with our school system and with our prosecutors' offices is important. And then the over-policing of children, I think, is a separate question. And that is that we need to reimagine how we are utilizing law enforcement in our schools. What Ms. Jackson, the statistic that she just gave us, that we have 12 officers in a school, but only one mental health professional in school, is astonishing to me. It does go to our values. And we want to have more individuals working in the school that are there to provide guidance and help, and are there to intimidate or make you feel like you're going to be arrested if you do something wrong.
And I'd love to jump in on that as well. And just to put in perspective how wild that is, as the Washington Post had reported, there is a 1 in 614 million chance of a child being killed on a campus by a school shooter. There is a 1 in 1,000 chance of a Black boy or Black man being killed by a police officer in their lifetimes. I am the mother of 2 Black boys and a Black daughter. I would rather not see my schools covered with police officers. That creates much more fear in my mind and heart than does the fear of a school shooter. And so while we certainly have to address the tragedies that happen, we also have to put in perspective and make sure that the schools are safe for all children, because all children are not similarly situated and all children don't suffer the impact the same ways. And when we are creating these policies, it is critically important that we have all of those perspectives at the table. The composition of the Marjorie Stoneman Douglas Commission is just unbelievable and absolutely unacceptable. It is made up primarily of law enforcement officers. There are no current educators. There are no people of color who are voting members of that commission. There are no students. There are no known advocates of students with disabilities. It's missing a lot of people to be crafting policies that become law and that hurt and endanger our children. So we first have to start with showing up at these commission meetings. And let me be clear, there is a lot of grassroots work being done. I am so proud as I walk in this space to see youth-led organizations like Power U in Dade County, like the Florida Student Power Network, like Dream Defenders, like March for Our Lives. These are student-led organizations who are doing the work, who are showing up at their school board meetings. They need your support. Your children need to be out there. We have to lift the voices of the people who are impacted. And in this case, it's our children. They should be front and center in designing these policies and saying what is and is not appropriate. It has to be a community-centered model, and we have to be able in order for that to happen.
So that's a great lead into another one of the questions that we have from the audience, which is, basically, what can we do at the school board level, at the school district level, to help end the school to prison pipeline? What are things that we can do at the local level with school districts? Who wants to take that?
We can show up again at the meetings and demand that there are memorandum of understanding in place as to how officers are allowed on campuses. We can ask for data and statistics to be collected and reported publicly. We can ask for that to be disaggregated by race and gender and disability status. We can ask for it to be disaggregated by each school so that parents can make an informed decision about the kind of school they want their children to be in and whether or not they want their children under the kind of surveillance and policing that we have been seeing pop up in this climate. So we can hold school districts quite accountable. And there are districts who are modeling and doing it better than others. And there are some that are dismal failures. We are right now fighting in Pasco County about the predictive policing model, where there are over 400 children on a list that children and their parents don't even know if they are on that list based on things like whether or not the child got a D or whether or not the child has ever been Baker Acted. This is private information that should not be in the hands of police and should not be used against children because it has the opposite effect of what we want it to have. It puts underground mental health services because what child or parent will take their children to get those services if it means that they will be labeled a threat? So we can show up and we can demand that our districts protect our children's privacy, their information, and that they have appropriate agreements in place, that they not surveil our students. There are many, many things we can ask of our districts.
So I just wanted to add to what Ms. Jackson is saying, and this may be very simple, and I think we overlook this, is we can show up at the ballot box every 2 to 4 years, and we can focus on who we are electing to our school board. Oftentimes, I think we all kind of get caught up in national politics and are not really focused on the local races, and we forget that our local races impact our day-to-day in a way that national politics does not. And with this issue specifically focusing on the school board, this should be a topic that we are all asking candidates at the next election cycle. What is your position on this? How will you vote on these topics? And what can we expect of you if we elect you? And then hold them accountable. Keep up with it. And 2 years later or 4 years later, if they are not living up to what they said they would do, elect another individual and keep up with that individual and make sure that we are electing the right people to these positions.
Kim, anything that you want to say that folks should do with their local school boards?
I mean, I pretty much agree with show up. I believe in community policing, that, it should be the community leading the way. What do they want in their community? And be more on the problem solving, because there's there's police problem solving policing also, where, you know, they look to see what's the problem and get, you know, a network of resources to the people that need help instead of, you know, arresting. But yeah, it should be community led. What does that community want in their community?
Great. Well, thank you all very much, and thanks to members of the audience who submitted questions. I want to especially thank this great panel tonight, Bacardi Jackson, Alfredo Zamora, and Kim Lawrence. Thank you for the work that you are doing to build a movement for justice and equality in Florida. Amazing work during a very challenging time. Now, at the end of every installment of We Make the Way, we ask those of you who are watching to take action. Action about something that is going on in Florida at this very moment. And tonight, we want to remind you again that the Florida Legislature is currently considering an atrocious voter suppression bill. You've probably heard about the voter suppression bill that just passed in Georgia. You may not have heard that the bill in Georgia is just one of over 250 separate bills introduced in 43 different states this year. Florida has one of those 250 direct attacks on the right to vote in the form of a bill called SB 90. It's a bill that makes it harder for people to vote by mail, makes it harder for folks to drop off mail ballots, makes it harder for folks who have a disability or who are elderly and receiving care to vote. And it intentionally makes it harder for communities of color, especially Black and Hispanic Floridians, to cast ballots. Now, Governor DeSantis, who supports the bill, he wants to dress up this bill, SB 90, as though it's just a bunch of minor technical changes. Nothing to see here. But that's just because they want to try and distract you from the frontal assault on democracy that is happening here. This bill, SB 90, is about taking the state back in time. Back to a time when the vote belonged to the few rather than to the many. Back to a time when obstacles were the norm. Back to a time before the right to vote was protected. Now, I'm not really sure whether they want to go back to 1961 or 1861 or 1761 with these voter suppression tools, but we're not interested in going back to any of those years. We're interested in moving forward towards a deeper, richer, stronger, more vibrant democracy. And that's why tonight we need you to speak up and speak out about this bill. We're asking you to be in touch with your state legislature about it, and quickly, because there are just a few weeks left in this legislative session. We still have an opportunity to stop this terrible bill that undermines our values. So if you go to our website at aclufl.org, you can find many helpful resources, ones that will assist you in contacting your member of the legislature to speak out about this, to tell them that when it comes to our democracy, we won't go back, and that's why we oppose SB 90. Now, that wraps up We Make the Way for this evening. Again, I'm Micah Kubik, Executive Director of the ACLU of Florida. On behalf of all of us at the ACLU, thank you again to our panelists. Thank you for being with us. Until next time, keep making the way for freedom, for justice, and for equality. Good night.
Thank you.